everybody, we're in Fort Morgan, Alabama, and we are here visiting a Navy Cove oyster farm, and we're going to be learning about oyster farming and how it goes from the farm to the table. So tell us about Navy Cove oysters. So how did it come about? How did you choose this property?
My now partner John Supan and I, we enjoy doing things outside together. We had done a lot of research. We were sitting on that porch up there, and I asked John, I said, could we grow oysters out here? So we got our beers and put on our tennis shoes and walked out into the water, and it's a perfect site. Good high salinity sandy bottom, and so we began collaborating with Bill Walton at Auburn University on trying the site out. And trying the site out means, will you lend us a cage? They said sure. Stocked it with some oysters that Auburn gave us, and that was one cage, and now we're up to about 180 cages and a much larger footprint, but that was the beginning of the farm. This is an ideal place to grow oysters because you don't need a boat to get to it. You can walk out on the farm, and it really rarely gets more than neck deep except under really high tides and heavy winds.
So what does the oyster season look like? Or does it go from a
to describe to describe the oyster season, there really is no particular season.
Okay.
We're limited by hatchery production. And so we try to get our seed early in the spring and then later in the summer and early fall to spread out those two crops, we call them. Two different spawning groups that this past year Auburn produced, and I think Auburn's going to do it again next year. And then through farm management, we spread out that seed as it grows so we have year-round sales. If you're an oyster connoisseur or you're a boutique oyster seller like Sassy Bass is, you want to have that product available year-round. And so we try to manage the farm that we're harvesting twice a week, all the time. And it's funny you should ask that question because we're coming to the end of a production cycle now. The last of our, it would be our fall 2020 crop. We're almost out of that, and they're fairly large oysters right now. The spring crop, which we began back in May, is just coming up to market size. So, we hope there's no lag. We may have 3 or 4 weeks of no sales, but our season is year-round. That's a great question.
Yeah. So, how long does it take from seed to the finished oyster product?
Again, that's a farm management tactic. We're very fortunate in the Gulf region that oysters grow really quickly here. They grow almost year-round. But we like to get our oysters beginning to go to market 6 months after coming onto the farm.
Okay.
So they leave the nursery, we put them on the farm, and then within 6 months, that product will be market size. It'll be small, but they'll be market size. And then by 12 months, that crop's gone and we're on to the next one.
So how do you actually manage them? I know you have cages, but how do you manage them?
Well, there are several ways to manage them. One is by the density of the seed in the bag. I'll show you some, if you want to walk out there, we can go look at them. If they're too dense, they tend to grow more slowly because the oysters on the inside of the bag don't get as much food. That's one tactic. Another tactic is that we separate the slow growers from the fast growers by running them through the grader, and we can uncover that if you want to take a look at it. Yeah, this is an Oyster Grader. We have 2 different size tubes. You can see the one with the small holes. So we put our really small seed through that. You dump the bags in the hopper. The oysters travel down the tube as the tube rotates, and this grades them into different sizes. Early in the season, we'll grade them through the small tube. A little bit later in the season, we'll grade them in the big tube. And you can see how the size difference separates out the grower. We get 3 sizes. Smaller ones drop through the smaller hole and fall into bins under the grader. Larger ones drop through the hole here and fall into a bin, and the biggest ones go out the end. Now with this particular size hole, whatever comes out the end is ready for market. So then we can put these back on the farm, and we know from experience how long they will take to get to market size depending on the time of year.
So what's your ideal size for an oyster to go to market?
You know, the market standard is greater than 2.5 inches, so 2.5 to 3 inches, and that's the long axis of the oyster. You know, you see oysters come out of the West Coast that are much smaller. Kumamotos are an example of that, but our sweet spot is 2.5 to 3 inches. Can sell a 2.25 inch now and then. And of interest, people don't want them when they get really big. You know, when you get up to a 4-inch oyster, that's getting almost too big to sell in a boutique bar, but it's good shuck meat, so they'll shuck that. So it's nice if we have too many oysters and we can't move them quickly enough, our collaborator, Bon Secours Fisheries, will actually shuck them and pay us for the meat. Yeah, Megan, I wanted to show you the sequence of bag sizes because that's a really important part of farm management. When we first get the seed in from the hatchery, we'll put them in our nursery, which is on a dock, and they're in barrels. And then when they're large enough, when they're about 4 millimeters in size, we put them in these spat bags, they're called. And we'll fill them up to about right here, right about there, and that's 10,000 oysters. So, you know, it's amazing to watch oysters and how quickly they grow. And when this gets to about a little over half full, then we'll take them out of these bags and put them into these 4 millimeter bags. And this is a 6 millimeter seed goes into here. And again, we start them out about that deep in the bag, and that's 4,000 of them. We'll let them grow up till about this size, and you'll see some out there if we walk out on the farm that the bags are absolutely full. And then they go into a 9 millimeter bag, which is this one. And again, we'll put them about that deep in the bag, and that's 2,000 oysters. And let them grow up, and you'll see these bags out there. And so we keep going up until the largest mesh size. And it's important that as you're managing the farm, we make sure the bags stay clean, because as epiphytic growth colonizes the bag, it reduces oxygen to the inner part of the bag. You reduce that flow rate. So our largest mesh size are these, what we call 1-inch bags. And you can imagine what kind of flow rates you get out of that. And we'll fill these up to about right between 1/4 and 1/2, and that's 250 to 300 oysters. So we start at 10,000 and we end up at 250 to 300 per bag. The other thing we got to make sure we do is that we put these PVC closures, and this slides on the bag like this. This is what keeps the oysters in the bag, and we learned the hard way, so it slides on like that all the way across. During Hurricane Sally, some of these popped off because it was so rough out here in the bay. So now we have to wire tie them all on just to keep everything in there. Sure you want to do this?
Ah! This is cold.
It's fine after you get in there for a few minutes. You got to get deeper than that.
Oh, okay.
Just to get the feel of it. Are you a swimmer?
Yeah.
What temperature you like to swim?
Not this cold. Lord.
Part of the management of the farm involves drying the oysters. Much like oysters on the East Coast, where you have a 6-foot tidal range, at low tide, oysters are out of the water and they dry off. And that's really important. If you don't, you're going to get barnacles like these that grow up on the oyster and make it not as an appealing a product as it would be if it was a clean oyster. And so we dry ours. And so we come out here and manually flip these cages. And you can see all the colonizing growth on this. This gets on the oysters also. This cage has been in the water since before hurricane season, so it's a little bit gummed up, but these are the shells I was talking to you about where we put the bags in. And so that each cage holds 6 bags. When we first stocked the spat bags out, one cage is 60,000 oysters. By the time we go to market, one cage is about 1,500 oysters. So we flip it over, we leave it over for about 24 hours. In the wintertime, summertime, about 16 hours. It dries out, it kills all the stuff that's growing on the cage, on the float, and on the oysters, and then we flip them back into the water. Also helps your agility when you're 68 years old to be able to do this. Okay, these are our next crop. Each one of these bags has, I think, 2,000 seed in it. And so you can see how big they are, Megan. And some of these are just getting up to the lower end of market size. So we're going to run these through the grader over the next 2 weeks and separate out the fast growers from the slow growers. See how clean the cage is from drying compared to that other one that we hadn't been flipping? But you can also see how full the bags are. And when they get this full, they don't grow real well in the middle of the bag because it's not getting food, not getting current, the oxygen's probably low. So we prefer to have the bags less than half full for optimal growth. A typical oyster will build up fat all winter. It will begin the spawning process in April, May, and June and converts all that fat to gametes, or eggs and sperm. And then it'll spawn again in September a little bit. But by the end of the summer, oysters are real thin and watery, and the advantage of triploids over that is that they are fat year-round. So they have a lot of, they're buttery, they're plump, succulent if the water quality is right. So these are triploid oysters. I didn't bring my oyster knife. Let's see if I can do this without jabbing my finger. So this is, by fat, I mean, see all this tan gray matter? That's fat. And this time of year, the wild oyster is real watery and thin. So probably in the same shell, a wild oyster would have about half the meat weight as this one. And so this is one of our objectives, is to produce a very fat oyster. And this is where the omega-3s are, omega-6s. And this is the stomach. See, the stomach is full of that brown and green algae. So that's what they're digesting. This is the abductor muscle. There are 2 parts to the abductor muscle. An oyster will typically, be open just a little bit, and that allows it to pump water as it sits in the bag or on the bottom or on a piling. It pumps water, and it pumps that water across these gills right here.
Oh, wow. It's all very fascinating.
Are you an oyster eater?
Yes.
Want to eat it?
Sure, I'll give it a try.
You'll be brave. There's a mudworm coming in from the side. See that one?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
It's just a fascinating little creature.
It is.
And so from here they go, based off our conversation with Eric yesterday, they go to the wholesaler and then they go to the restaurant.
Yeah, the oyster regulations are pretty strict, and that's a nationwide agreement that is set in motion by the FDA and the ISSC. The ISSC is the Interstate Sanitary Shellfish Commission. They represent the industry, and they talk about problems that come up, Vibrio or birds on the farm or things like that, and they agree on certain common practices. The FDA approves them, and then so our state agencies implement those regulations. So that pretty much is how the farm process is governed through a legal perspective. One of those regulations is we have to sell to a wholesale dealer who has proper cleaning equipment. They have coolers, they can track temperature, and then they deliver them to restaurants. So we aren't in that business. Now, some of the bigger farms in Alabama are turnkey. They have their own walk-in coolers, and they have to comply with all the regulations. But we elected not to do that. We have a wonderful partnership with Bon Secours Fisheries. We take the oysters out of the bags that are behind you. We deliver them to Bon Secours in our bags, and then they dump them, wash them, box them, put them in the cooler, and then deliver them to market.
So that's what's unique about the Sassy Bass brand, is that they serve all Navy Cove oysters. Tell us about that partnership.
I was working here at Sassy Bass, and I met my business partner Chuck Wilson 6 years ago here at Sassy Bass. He was a customer here. We formed a relationship, became friends, and started working for him on the oyster farm. And after about 1.5 years, he asked me to be a business partner with him to handle social media and the marketing of the oysters for Sassy Bass and restaurants all over the Gulf Coast. Now we have 6 locations of Sassy Bass, or of our Sassy Bass family of brands.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that. So you also have a market here?
Yes, we have a market that has seafood deli counter with pizza. We got a gift shop. We have our Sassy Bass at OWA, at the theme park, and then our Sassy Bass Island Grill at the plantation all serve the Navy Cove oysters.
So they go from the farm to the wholesaler. What's that process like, and then to you?
Yeah, we go through our wholesaler, and she sells. We have a realtor or agent that salesperson that sells to all restaurants, other wholesalers included out of Houston or Atlanta, and then restaurants Destin, Fort Worth, all over the Gulf Coast. So she'll give us a number of how many oysters that we need or she needs, be it 4,000 or 6,000. And we'll harvest and deliver to her. They'll wash them, box them, and then ship them out.
So how do you ensure that the product is safe?
We ensure the product's safe by knowing where the oysters came from, how we properly handle them. We make sure we have a time temperature matrix. At whatever temperature it is, that's how long the oysters can stay out of water or out of refrigeration. So we follow that strictly to stop bacteria, Vibrio, and any other thing harmful, but also keeps the oysters have a longer shelf life as long as you get them cool faster.
Yeah. So what's the trick you have keeping an oyster happy once it's out of the water?
Keep them nice and cool, and they like an environment with not a lot of moisture, because they've already closed up their shell and they have all their moisture in. And then you want to keep them under 40 degrees is a perfect temperature. Keep them happy, and then they'll be ready to be shucked.
What's the best way to eat an oyster?
When I grew up eating oysters, before I had my first Navy Cove oyster or a boutique oyster, I was eating Gulf oysters with my buddies, drinking beer with a cracker, hot sauce, ketchup, horseradish, and everything else. And I wasn't really enjoying the oyster. More of a drinking experience, eating oysters. Then I ate my first Navy Cove oysters and tasted flavors I'd never tasted in an oyster before, whether it be cucumber or a little butter or green onion, the salt content. So it made me realize that all this time, I really like crackers, ketchup, and hot sauce. I didn't really like oysters until I ate a good, true oyster. So it's an experience here at the restaurant where I try, when I see a guest pulling out 12 crackers for 12 oysters, I usually ask them to eat an oyster without anything on it, and then they can dress it appropriate to their taste.
Yeah. So how many oysters do you sell a day, you think, on average?
We sell between 25 and 30 dozen a day at this time of year. We get in the summertime, we'll get up to 40 to 50 dozen. And we've become a destination where people come back year after year for Navy Cove oysters. And then they're able to see the form from the road, so they know where it's coming from.
You know, another, I think an important point to make, since this will be, students will be seeing this, is that the The state agencies of Alabama have been really supportive of this, thanks to the efforts of Auburn. They brought together the Department of Health, Environmental Management, Fish, Game and Fish, all the federal agencies, and I was appointed by the governor of Alabama at the time to begin discussions about what do we need to do to have a robust, easy to permit industry, and they were so supportive. Because the way the laws are written in Alabama, if you own a piece of property, like the people we rent from own this property here, they have usufruct of 1,800 feet out from the shoreline. And that law was set into place so people could build docks off of their homes. Well, state lands, which is under the Department of Conservation, figured out a way that they could lease the water column and water bottom legally to interested farmers. And so if you have a farm, you've got to talk to state lands about getting a permit to grow on public property.
We're in the Mississippi Sound just offshore of Battery, Alabama, near our oyster park. And my role with Extension is to assist folks that are either in oyster aquaculture commercially, or they're looking to get started in the industry. And some of the challenges with that are basic business planning, which we have some good resources to help them with. And another challenge is, once you have a site picked out, to go through the permitting process in order to have a commercial operation can take about 10 to 12 months. And you go through the Corps of Engineers and the State Lands Division of Alabama, but you touch multiple agencies, and sometimes folks just need help with communicating who to talk to in those different agencies. So that's what I get to do.
So if someone wanted to go into oyster farming, they would come to you and you would kind of help them walk through the process?
Yeah, so we worked with the multiple agencies that are part of the permitting process, and we set up a website. It's alaquaculture.com, and on there is basically all the information and contact for those steps. But the first thing I ask anyone that contacts us is where they're looking to put their farm, because either you own a piece of property that's in conditionally approved waters by the Department of Health that is in a good environmental spot for growing oysters. You either have to own it or you have to have a lease for that property. The other way to get into farming is if you are able to get a plot in the Grand Bay Oyster Park that's managed by Alma Bryant High School. But that's the first question is where are you thinking? And we have maps, and it's very easy to determine based on classifications by the Department of Health and where the different freshwater inflows are, whether it's a good spot. And that's what we do with Extension, as with terrestrial crops and row crops and cattle and things like that. As a specialist, you can just go on site and share what information you have and resources.
So how big of an industry is the oyster industry in
So from some surveys we did and from harvest reports from the agency here in Alabama, we know that in 2020 there were about 2.4 million single oysters harvested, and just using sort of what we understand the market price to be, that's a revenue of about $1,400,000 of revenue. So it's a sizable markets, but when you look at more mature markets that have been around 20 or 30 years, there's some states that's in the tens of millions. So they grow fast here. They grow as fast here as anywhere that in the country. Every region has their challenges with farming, just like with terrestrial crops. But the good thing is there's plenty of nutrients, and we don't have the challenge of freezing over, lakes and like they do up north and things like that. So yeah, the oysters are happy. And again, these are single individual oysters grown with very specific techniques for the premium half shell market.
Oh, okay. So what are your biggest threats on the farm?
Well, we have one coming right now. That's a great question. We have a harmful algal bloom that's right now off Panama City, Florida. It's a, trying to name, it's a dinoflagellate, Brevortia, I think is the name of it. And you know, you've heard of red tides off Florida before. They release toxins that can cause lung irritation, give people emphysema-like symptoms. They also have toxins in the water, and it gets into the meat of the oyster potentially, and if you eat it you can get sick. So that's moving this way, and then when it comes into the Bay Area here, the Department of Public Health will shut down harvest. So that's a threat, and that's just basic water quality issues. And you know, we tend to see one here about every 5 to 10 years. Unfortunately, they're off Tampa, Florida annually, and they appear off Texas more frequently. Another threat is heavy rainfall. You know, we had a lot of rain this past spring. The water in the bay got really fresh, and that reduces growth rates and the quality of the oyster. I don't think there's any appeal to an oyster that comes out of really low salinity water. My partner and I say it's like eating a dish rag out of the sink. So I just tasted the water here. The salinity today is probably about 20, and so the oysters right now would be perfect. The third threat, and this is a long-term challenge for us, is hatchery supply. You know, Auburn has worked really hard to get this industry up and going with Sea Grant support like Texas and Louisiana and Florida. They all work together because we're trying to promote the development of a Gulf boutique oyster. But it requires a stable supply of hatchery animals, so you need that capacity. Auburn did it for years, and a state agency or a university shouldn't be in the production game. I mean, it's okay to jumpstart an industry, do everything you can to help it develop, but you know, Auburn, particularly in your department, is supposed to move on to the next technical challenge for whatever animal it happens to be. Auburn got a hatchery started up here locally, and it did well, but Hurricane Sally and prior storms really hammered them, and so they haven't come back online yet. So Auburn Shellfish Lab has stepped back up to the plate. They're back in production. They're supplying all the farms in Alabama and some in Florida and a few in Louisiana and Mississippi. But that's not a sustainable enterprise. And so hatchery development and hatchery production is a long-term need of the industry in the Gulf region. Well, you know, I think another important thing that you might want to make sure that the viewers understand is that oyster gardening is great because it enhances the habitat. You know, you're putting something in the water that cleans the water, provides structure, and even armors shorelines. Well, the farms do the same thing. Our farm, the way I look at it anyhow, our farm removes nitrogen, removes phosphorus, because they're consuming phytoplankton that use that in their metabolic pathways. And we have a lot of fish that live around the cages. We have triple tail and trout and redfish, in addition to all their forage species like mullet and pinfish and minnows live around the cages. And so fishing is great out here. We always fish in the morning before we go to work and catch a few trout. So it's really fun to do, but all the farms are a benefit to the habitat and the ecology of Mobile Bay. You know, we've lost our oyster population, natural oyster population, due to overharvest and sedimentation and shipping traffic and things like that. And anything we can do to put even temporary habitat out there will be beneficial.
Yeah, I believe in local and sustainable seafood, especially Alabama seafood. We have so much local, fresh seafood around here that it's important that we get our customers educated. So a lot of our customers come from Tennessee, Kentucky, Michigan, Illinois. They've never seen an oyster or eaten an oyster. So it's an experience, and some of them love them, some of them hate them, but it's an experience to get to enjoy local, fresh, right across the street. So when they say, where do you oysters come from? And we say across the street, it's the honest truth. That's the most important, is the guest interaction. And through oysters, made friendships for the rest of my life just through oysters.
Like I say, it's farming, and it's farming in the water. But the people are all of the folks that are involved with it have a passion for the actual activity of farming, but also the environment and how the benefits that the oysters provide to the bay and the areas they farm in.